Today we are going to continue working through all of the lore of the Bond CEs. Today we're going to be doing the Lancers. Alright, let's get to it. We start off with Q's Bond CE, the Shooting Star of Prophecy. While I can't exactly find anything on seeing an actual meteor, there was a prophecy about Q's life that this was trying to mirror. After he had slain the dog of Kulin and become Q-Kulin, Q overheard a prophecy being told by the druid Kothbab that any warrior who took up arms on a certain day would gain everlasting fame. So, the little Q, at only 7 years old, rushed to the King Concobar and asked for weapons. The only one that could withstand his strength was the king's very own weapon, and Q took it and returned to Kothbab. However, Q had left before hearing the whole prophecy, that while a warrior would gain everlasting fame, they would die young. This is why you should always read your contracts. I am certain that there is something more to this CE than meets the eye, so I'm going to do some theory crafting instead. Despite its color, I would have to be convinced that this elixir was in fact a vial of Liz's blood. This is because historically, Liz bathed in the blood of maidens to keep her own appearance young, and this would also play into the idea that she has the genetics of a dragon, whose blood also is said to have healing properties. So unless this is a reference to Fate Extra that is completely going over my head, that is about as close to historical accuracy as I think I can get with Liz. Benkei's is none other than his famous encounter with Ushiwakamaru at the Gojo Bridge. Benkei was on a mission to collect the swords of 1,000 warriors that he had defeated in battle. He had defeated 999 and came across Ushi playing a flute at a shrine. Benkei challenged him to a fight for his sword and Ushi agreed but asked that they fight away from the temple. They took it to the bridge and Ushi defeated Benkei. Benkei would challenge Ushi again the next night and lose once more, and then decided to pledge his service to Ushi, thus leading him down the path that he took for the rest of his life. So, I mentioned this story earlier, but Q-Kulin gets his nickname from the infamous Hound of Kulin that he killed as just a child. King Concobar saw Q playing hurling and was so impressed by his performance that he offered to have the boy join him for a feast at Kulin's home. Q agreed to come, but only after he had finished the game, so the king went on alone to Kulin's. Concobar forgot to tell Kulin about Q coming along later, and so he let out his massive guard dog. When Q made it to Kulin's house, he was attacked by the massive dog but managed to beat it and kill it. Kulin was devastated by the loss of his dog, so Q told him that he would act as his guard dog until Kulin could raise a new one. Hence how he got the name Q-Kulin, or the Hound of Kulin. This may be the hardest one that I'm going to have to cover because it's quite literally nothing. It's just called Rome and it's just the helmet that Romulus wears that he didn't wear in history. So instead, I will answer a question that may have crossed your mind in the past regarding Rome, which is why is it associated with the color red? Well, this is for a few reasons. Rome's patron deity was Mars, who is also associated with red, but Rome goes further by naturally associating red with blood as well as with courage. The Hot Gates is one that likely doesn't need an introduction because it lives in infamy, so I'll tell the story in brief. Leonidas led a force of 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebians in a last stand against the army of the Persian ruler Xerxes. It had been prophesied that Sparta would fall unless a Spartan king died, and so Leonidas stood with his men in the area of Thermopylae against suicidal odds. Fittingly, it was believed that Thermopylae was a gate to Hades, so they would literally be fighting on death's door. The much smaller Greek force managed to hold off the Persian invaders for 3 days thanks to superior weapon technology and terrain advantage, and this holdout is believed to be what turned the tides of war and allowed Greece to emerge victorious. What is depicted here are the famed shining helmet of Hector and his weapon Durandal. Hector was famed for having a shining helm, and so it seemed a bit odd that it would be absent altogether from his design in FGO. I may have an explanation for that. During Hector's last visit with his wife and son, the shine off of Hector's helmet frightened the boy and caused him to cry. This can be taken as a bad omen for the future, and so Hector prays to Zeus to make his son into a great warrior before setting off. The Bond CE itself muses that the weapon and armor should be practical over showy, possibly to reflect this, no pun intended. So Fate has done this thing where they took Skahawk and made her into an OC. Skahawk is an incredibly minor character in the Ulster cycle, serving more so as another teacher of Q more than anything else. As such, the Land of Shadows, aka Dunskoth, is equally unexplored or fleshed out. It should be noted that it is not an actual underworld like Hades, but rather something closer to Limbo. You can actually visit Dunskoth Castle and the Land of Shadows, as the ruins of the castle still stand today in Scotland. A knight's pledge to his king is one seen as nearly absolute. Diarmaid's oath to Fionn and the Red Branch Knights was no different. However, the musing on the CE is how he would come to betray his king in a way. After Fionn was an old man, he sought to marry a young maiden named Gran. She didn't want to marry someone who could have been her grandfather, and so opted to try and seduce one of his knights. This knight would be Diarmaid. While initially reluctant, he was essentially cursed to help her and ran away with her, knowing that this would likely lead to her death. This betrayal would result in them both being hunted down, but I will save the rest for the Diarmaid video that I'm working on. There is no historical precedent in the transformation of King Arthur into an aspect of the Wild Hunt, but if you are interested in that at all, I recommend checking out this video. For now though, the C is meant to explain the difference between Lancer Alter and Artoria Lancer. Lancer Alter usurped the power of the Lance Wrongmeniad and chose to remain herself, as opposed to Artoria Lancer, who allowed herself to become the goddess of the lance. This CE is not directly related to Karna, as it instead tells of a parable of what makes life happy. Karna is a complicated figure in myth. He is described as being a genuinely good person, even sacrificing his own immortality for others by giving up his earrings and armor. Karna often gave away his own possessions to others to help them without thinking of the damage that it could do to himself. Much like the old beggar in this parable, Karna sought to give all that he could for it being the right thing to do, as opposed to showing off how generous he was. What else could Fionn be but the famed salmon of knowledge? The tale goes like this. A wise old man named Finn spent 7 years attempting to catch the salmon of knowledge, and finally managed to do so. He gave it to his servant boy, Fionn MacCumhale, to prepare for him to eat, but was told that he mustn't eat any of it. Fionn did as he was told, but burnt his thumb on some boiling fat and sucked on it to ease the pain. This gave him all of the knowledge of the salmon. When Finn saw that Fionn had gained the knowledge, he asked him if he had eaten any of the salmon. Fionn denied this and explained what had happened. Finn realized that it was not his fate to gain this knowledge, so he gave the rest of the salmon to Fionn to eat, who ever after could draw upon all the world's knowledge by biting his thumb. Brynhild's bonsai is meant to symbolize her suicide. After she killed Sigurd, she was so overcome with grief at the loss that she threw herself upon his funeral pyre, and thus the two ashes mingled together, which is romantic in a very morbid sort of way. The CE seems to indicate that Bryn still feels those flames even now. The life of Li Shuen is fascinating. He is someone who devoted the entirety of his life to training in the martial arts and then teaching them. This CE speaks of how he was never satisfied with his abilities, and up until he eventually was killed, he continued to sharpen his skills. So from what I am turning up, Dun Stallion is not a name, but rather a descriptor for the horse. Dun is this color in equestrian terms, and a stallion is an uncastrated male horse. As such, this horse is not Lamray, who is a mare, but rather Arthur's second horse, Hengrun. At present, I can't find any legends around this particular horse, but it took me an unnecessarily long amount of time to figure out if Dun Stallion was a third horse that existed, and it's not. As we have seen, and will continue to see, summer bonsais hold almost no bearing in history the majority of the time. Though if I were to go for a stretch, we could make a reference to the setting sun in the sun motif at all as a reference to Tamamo's roots of being an aspect of Amaterasu in Fate. That said, no such connection exists in history for this more appealing Heineken commercial. Kyo's is a perfect encapsulation of how much of a psycho Kiyohime actually is. Across the entire beach, she has written the phrase, aishitemasu, which means, I love you. However, due to her own overworking of herself, some of the letters have become muddled and she is clearly exhausted, unable to read them in the correct order. So, this CE likely takes place during Vlad's imprisonment in Hungary. He was captured and imprisoned and then subsequently framed for conspiracy in order for the Hungarians to take power. When questioned by the Pope why they had imprisoned someone who the church was personally sponsoring against the campaigns of Mehmed II, the Hungarians forged 3 documents claiming that Vlad would side with the Muslims if they would restore his throne. Thus, Vlad sat in prison for 14 years and his faith became tempered by this time. Jalter Lily's Door to the Ocean is a pseudo-fate invention based on possible real-life events, kind of. Jalter Lily has one wish, as it is something that normal Jean would supposedly never manage to do, and that was to see the ocean. The veracity of this claim is up in the air, but it makes for a sweet CE. Here are the alternatives if we want to explore more about the CE, because it mentions that the door here could take you anywhere, and that she read it in a sci-fi novel, kind of. My first thought is that this is more akin to the Doraemon Anywhere door that took her there. A commenter on the fandom page pointed out that the door may be referencing a sci-fi novel called The Door into Summer, which involves using time travel to age yourself up for certain reasons that might make Jalter uncomfortable. Both are a stretch, but they both exist. Another major deviation in history occurs in this CE, Enkidu's Flowers of Humbaba. Humbaba is often described as being a demon, but also a lone protector of the cedar forest who is very gullible. In the forest, Humbaba has various auras that make him invulnerable, so Gilgamesh and Enkidu decide to trick him by offering him bribes. These include a bride and a concubine, as well as the goods found in civilization. Humbaba agrees and gives up his auras and is then attacked by Gil. Humbaba pleads for mercy, saying that he has always lived alone and wishes to be spared. Gil asks Enkidu if they should show mercy for the poor wretch, and Enkidu promptly decapitates him. So with that said, the CE painting this interaction in a light where Enkidu felt that they were kindred spirits is far from accurate. Lil Deuce's bonsai is the clothing that she wishes that she could have worn for her immortal life, a matching outfit to her sisters Steno and Uriel. However, as we know, Medusa was different for some reason or another and continued to grow larger, leading her to eventually be assaulted and transformed into the monstrous Gorgon, who would then eat her beloved sisters. This should go without saying, but this is a Fate fabrication. I would like to give a shout out to the thesis paper The Fire and the Jaguar, which I will have linked below for this. Taiga's bonsai is the primeval flame. In many traditions of South America, the jaguar was a Prometheus-esque figure that gave fire to humanity. The one specifically mentioned in the bonsai comes from the Gué of Brazil. Summarized, humans originally ate foul things like rotten wood and fungus, and could only heat their food by leaving little bits of meat on rocks to get warm. One day, a boy breaks his sister's husband's hand with a rock while getting macaw chicks to eat and is left in the macaw nest on the cliff. He is rescued by a jaguar who takes him home and treats him as a son. At the jaguar's house, the jaguar's wife has a fire going, but she seems to dislike the boy for being both skinny and ugly. The next day, the jaguar male leaves and tells his wife to give the boy whatever cooked meat he wants when he asks. When the boy asks, the wife tells him to get different meat, but the boy takes the one that he wants instead. The wife scares the boy and he runs off. This happens for a few more days until the male jaguar gives the boy a bow and says to kill his wife if she does it again, and then to leave for his village. The male jaguar also warns his wife, but the events unfold as they did before and the boy kills her. He then takes the fire used for cooking, the bow, and many other things to the village and teaches them how to make fire and cook food with this. Thus, humanity no longer had to eat foul things. This one actually explains itself fairly well within the text of the Bansii. Raiko didn't have a horse called Kyogoku, but rather it is named after the Nyo Kyogoku, which I am not finding in any research. Given the kanji present in the Japanese text, I'm assuming that this was a treaty formed between the Minamoto and Fujiwara clans. It should go without saying that bulls hold a special meaning in Hinduism and are viewed as divine animals. While there are several parables about Parvati and her bull, I'm going to go with one. One day Parvati and Shiva went for a ride on a bull. Shiva took the form of an old man, and Parvati stayed her beautiful self. Parvati rode it first, and Shiva walked alongside her. People saw and criticized Parvati for forcing a frail old man to walk while she rode. Thus, they switched positions. They continued on, and more people started criticizing Shiva for forcing a young woman to work so hard while he stayed fat on the bull. Thus, both Parvati and Shiva rode together. Even further on, people criticized them for abusing the poor animal by both riding on it. So, they both got off and were then called idiots for bringing a bull to ride but then walking instead. The moral of the story is that no matter what you do, people are going to complain, so just do what you think is right. Japan has an interesting relationship between monks and warriors. For a large part of Japanese history, up until Nobunaga came in and reformed Japan, warrior monks in monasteries were a fairly common force. It was possible to recruit such monks to your war cause, and they were generally seen as skilled warriors. Isshin was born after this had dissolved and was no longer commonplace, but many warrior monks saw the honing of their weaponry as a form of meditation. This CE calls into question the contradiction of being a Buddhist monk where one of the tenets is to never kill, and a warrior monk whose job it is to kill. The solution to this was found in the belief that killing out of self-defense and the defense of others was permissible, but should be avoided as much as possible, hence why it was generally frowned upon for a monk to be the instigator of a fight. The Universe Ring was one of Neza's weapons. It was similar to a chakram and meant to be thrown at enemies. Neza had complete control over its movements and could make them expand or contract at will. This, along with the flame wheels and fire-tipped spear, were gifts given to Neza upon his resurrection. According to FGO, the act of her giving one of these rings as a Bansii is a sign that she trusts us to such an extent that she will attempt to resurrect herself to return to our side no matter what if she is to perish. This is very clearly meant to be reminiscent of the scene we witness in Babylon, the miracle provided by Merlin that caused flowers, a universal symbol of life, to bloom in the depths of Kur. Ancient Mesopotamia, and a lot of other ancient civilizations for that matter, believed that the underworld was genuinely a place that one could just stumble into on accident. Life was incapable of existing there for long, and much like the flowers that bloomed in Kur, they too eventually withered away. However, Fate's rendition of Eris shows that despite the blooming flowers vanishing, she will always remember that miracle. Divine metals are a common trope seen throughout many cultures and myths. What exactly distinguishes divine iron from normal iron is beyond me, outside of the name, but perhaps it is the process that transforms such a common thing as iron into the level of godhood. This is where dwarves come in Norse mythology. Throughout Norse mythology, the dwarves are always seen as master craftsmen, being the creators of some of the gods' most powerful weapons, such as Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. Thus, it wouldn't be a stretch to assume that the weaponry of the Valkyrie were crafted through similar means, giving them their divine nature. Surprisingly, there is more to Ibaraki CE than you may believe at first glance. Fireworks were originally introduced to Japan in the 17th century, and their meaning was festive in a different sort of way. Fireworks were used to mark tragic events, originally, as the bright colors and flashes could be equated to a life brightly burning and then fizzling out. As such, for Ibaraki, viewing fireworks in the context over Mount Oe could 100% be symbolic of a tragic event for her. All of her allies died on the mountain, including Shuten, with only herself and a few others surviving. I am absolutely reading way too much into this, but you know, whatever. Liang Yu's Bansi is not so much her spear itself, but rather an explanation as to why and what her spear is made of. Chinese ash trees are beautiful white flowering trees with incredibly durable and workable wood. As such, this makes it ideal for crafting a spear, which needs to be flexible enough to bend but strong enough to avoid being broken. ash wood and ash trees themselves have been revered across several cultures for their strength and workability. Bradamantes is a ring that once belonged to Angelica of Cathay. It was integral in being used to rescue Ruggiero from his confinement by the sorceress Atalanta. The ring itself has the ability to remove all magic that's cast upon the wearer's eyes. Thus, if they were trapped blindly wandering a castle because of an enchantment, they could be freed. Also, the ring was originally stolen from Angelica, so that may be why Brad is actually pensive about returning it. Naturally, for Kagetora, we are given a statue of the god Bishamatan, translated to roughly mean the 8-bladed Bishamatan. Bishamatan was a god of war and warriors with a particular note of being a vanquisher of those who cause evil. He is a guardian and gifter of various treasures and guards the places where the Buddha teaches. In terms of being a god of war, he actually appears much more reasonable than some, supposedly highlighting the beneficial aspects that come with fighting. Gareth's is a ring of transformation that allowed Gareth to hide his appearance. This likely comes from the fact that in several Gareth legends, Gareth himself hides his identity from others in order to prove his worthiness as a knight. One famous example is that Gareth was able to hold his own against Lancelot, but only on the condition that neither he nor Lancelot knew who the other was. The only other knight that is capable of doing this was Sir Tristan. Meltz holds no historiosity, but did you know that the sport of figure skating was invented by an Englishman sometime in the 18th century, though there are accounts of the Italians doing something similar before this time. It became what we know of it today by an American named Jackson Haynes, who added the energy and various movements that make it so beautiful. The Trident of Poseidon was a construction made by the Cyclopses for the god to use. Traditionally, a trident is a type of spear used for fishing, as the multiple prongs make it easier to pin down a fish. As such, it being the weapon of a god of the sea just makes logical sense. It is with this trident that Poseidon struck a rock near the Acropolis of Athens and created a sea, and supposedly it is his striking the earth with this trident that causes earthquakes to happen. Romulus Kieranus' Bond CE poses a bit of a problem for me because it is very abstract. The point of the CE is that the Roman Empire's influence is meant to elevate humanity to the gods, but given that their empire couldn't figure out that lead was bad for them and the fire is hot, I think there is more to it than that. If anything, this is likely an attempt of Romulus to reach out towards the area where he was initially from, given that he was the son of the gods after all. Thus, him reaching for the elevated land once more in the night sky seems to make a great deal of sense. Eris's Bond CE does all of the heavy lifting for me in terms of research. The plane modeled here is a miniature replica of the one flown by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, which I have completely butchered, better known as the author of the story The Little Prince. Antoine himself based parts of the story after a real-life wreck that he was in such a plane. Naturally, it should go without saying why the Little Prince holds a level of importance to Eris, given that Voyager's design is based very heavily off of the titular Little Prince. Yuz is nothing more than her getting her simple wish of spending the remainder of the summer with her beloved Zhang Yu. No jokes on this one, I'm just happy to see them together. Vritra is a demon who is able to create obstacles. This CE is meant to show that this power is not inherently evil. Let's look at what is presented to us in this Bond CE. This is most likely the Himalayan mountains. It is a desolate, frozen obstacle that has obstructed both the flow of travel and commerce for centuries. However, it is also what provides a natural land barrier that makes invasion against India more difficult, and from the melting snow and ice, the Ganges River flows. So, much like the figure of Vritra himself, there is more than meets the eye when one encounters an obstacle. Throughout time immemorial, the aurora has been seen as a message from the heavens. Its meaning has been interpreted from being a blessing, or in other cultures, a sign of fire. It has always been seen as something ethereal and magical. Oh, and if you were curious as to whether or not it could be seen from England, it can be on rare occasions. In fact, it was spotted in the year of recording this, 2023, as far south as Cornwall. Percival's CE is the lance Longinus, the very spear used by the Roman soldier of the same name to pierce the side of Jesus during his crucifixion. This spear is currently believed to still exist and is kept safe in the Vatican. It is believed that the wielder of Longinus will be granted incredible power, but should they lose the spear, they will die. In fact, and I shit you not, this is real, during World War II there was an actual race between the Germans and the Americans to locate various lost sacred relics that could supposedly give their owners power. Longinus was one such item that was supposedly searched for. If this sounds too close to the plot of Indiana Jones, that is because this is what Indiana Jones was inspired by. This is yet another example of FGO lore overriding history. I genuinely have nothing for you for the CE. All of the information present has to do with the coming Guda Guda event that likely will somewhat revolve around the fact that Ryoma and Oria will finally be able to make a pact that allows their souls to be ever intertwined. Going from that relatively happy CE to this one that is significantly more depressing, Mary Anning's is equally weird and obtuse. This one is just simply titled Birthplace, which puts its location in Lyme Regis, Dorset, England. The Bond CE itself describes how she is dying by being forgotten piece by piece and claims that no one needed her. In reality, this is likely because her contributions to the archaeological field of research were often given to others, making her appear less relevant in history than she actually was. If you want an example of something that she posited and partially was able to prove, she was one of the minds behind figuring out that extinction often happens in massive events rather than an animal just simply dying out. What else could good old Don CE be other than his beautiful princess Dulciana? Naturally, the princess was instead a farm girl that he was delusional about, but that didn't stop her existence from being the thing that spurred him into action and set him out on all of his adventures. Other than a pair of giants, I cannot think of a better thing that encapsulates the essence of Don Quixote. Hey, shout out to the Behind the Servants Britomart script that I've had written for 3 months and have done nothing with. Minor spoilers for the character of Britomart and Fate. Our Britomart is not the real Britomart, but one of the children of the real one. I do not recall a scarlet dress being something relevant to the Britomart from Legends, but this may instead be a reference to a different hero of the poem The Fairy Queen, called the Red Cross Knight. The Fairy Queen has a focus on its heroes showing a certain virtue, with Britomart herself being chastity. The virtue of the Red Cross was a representation of holiness, which, if you lived in medieval Europe, was absolutely a source of power. So on that note, thanks for watching. There are a lot less Lancers than I thought there were. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe and let me know in the comments. Check out my links down below for my Discord, Twitch, and Twitter. But for now, guys, keep your chin up. Peace.